Alright everybody, so the first thing that I wanted to show you how to do is to set up your page using the rule of thirds. So I'm just dividing my page into thirds, first horizontally, and then secondly I'm dividing it up vertically, so you should have 9 squares total. So the next thing I want to do is set up my foreground, middle ground, and background. So I'm just going to draw a line. The first line right there is going to be my foreground line. And then after that, I'm going to draw a line for my middle ground, which is just kind of slightly above that first line that we drew in for the grid of the rule of thirds. And then everything behind that middle ground line is going to be my background. So now I'm going to add a tree into my foreground, and I'm going to use that line that vertical line I made from the rule of thirds to kind of guide where I'm putting my tree. I'm putting it right through those intersecting points. Again, those are going to be the most interesting points in your composition. That's where you want your viewer's eye to go when they are looking at your landscape. So the next thing I want to do is work into my foreground some grass and some foliage. So I'm just making some pencil marks to look like grass. And since they're in the foreground, they are going to be bigger than the grass marks that I make in my middle ground. It's going to give us a nice illusion of space. And then I'm just working into my tree, adding some shading, adding some value. So things in the foreground are generally going to be much more detailed and a lot bigger than things in the middle ground and the background. So next I'm going into my middle ground and I'm just making some smaller pencil marks to represent the grass. A lot smaller than the grass marks in the foreground. Now notice how much smaller this tree is that I'm making in my middle ground than the tree is in my foreground. That's going to give us a nice illusion of space and separate our middle ground from our foreground. This shape that I'm drawing right above that line, that middle ground line, is supposed to represent a tree line, or like the forest's edge basically. And I'm representing that by just putting little tree trunks on those shapes. Then I'm going to go in after a minute and shade in that tree line or that foliage, and that'll make a nice separation between our middle ground and our background. Lastly, I'm going to work into the background, and I'm starting to do that by adding some rolling hills right above that middle ground line, and then those big lines are going to be my mountains that are in the very far background. Then I'm going to add a little path in the front here. I want you to notice how I use that line, that vertical line that we made from the rule of thirds, to figure out where I wanted to put my path. Also notice how it gets wider as it comes close to us and further as it goes off into the distance. Now I'm just going into my mountains and using the side of my pencil to add some shade into the mountains. The reason I'm adding that shade is because I want those mountains to look like they're set a little bit further back and really separate from the foreground and the middle ground.